Hello, hello. Adrian here. So we've very briefly touched on materials and sort of maybe startled a few of you with that interface. We're gonna start a material from scratch. So first off, because we're creating a new type of object and it's also our own type of object, we already have our imports and we have a whole bunch of geometry in there. But since we're not importing this, we're making it, I'm gonna firstly make a new folder and call it our materials. And we're going to open that up and right-click in here. And there's actually a whole bunch of objects that are in here that we can make. And these are all the objects that you sort of associate in. So as I was saying the last time, you can associate objects within materials. You can do a whole lot more of that. But for the time being, we're just going to click on material. And we're going to name that. Let's call it our mat. And mat for material, not the other guy. And
hey.
Quiet, you. So now we're going to double click on that and we'll see a blank version of our, one last thing. You can dock this in our example map. If you're working on one screen, working on two screens is a lot easier because of course you can put this on a different screen. But if you're working on one screen, grab this tab just like you would in Chrome or Firefox or anything like that. And you can dock it up here so you can switch easily between these two and use all of the real estate of your screen. And so we see here, this is our material. This is the endpoint of the material, so everything else should happen before this. And there's a few things we should understand about this. And first off, within Unreal, within how a lot of its inputs work within at least materials, is that everything is between 0 and 1. And that's just because it makes it easier to handle. So there's not these arbitrary numbers that sort of mean things. It's usually between 0 and 1 in terms of these qualities like metallic, specular, roughness. You'll understand in a second once I've sort of started editing these. The top left, we have a preview of our material. Because there's nothing attached to it yet, it just defaults to black. But we want to get ourselves a variable. And variables are just sort of groups of numbers. And actually want to get constant vectors, sorry. And the constant vectors they're a bit confusing to sort of understand, but it's essentially groups of numbers that let you make color and properties. And so in the right-hand side, we have our palette. There's a lot of stuff in here, but all we want is our constant vectors. You can drag them immediately out of here. The first one we want is a vector 3. This is a color, a sort of standard color, so it's R, G, and B respectively. At the moment, they're just 0, 0, 0. Which is black. So if we drop those in, it'll set our material black, which hasn't updated yet, but we'll fix that in a second. And we want to go over to our details panel. There we go, popped in. And we'll see RGB. So we want to set this to max, so we can set it to 255 as the maximum for those. So if we set it to 255 red, you'll get a little preview of what that'll be, and it'll go bright red. So this is what our material will look like. We can also just click on this constant bar and select it from this little color wheel, which is quite a bit easier. And it's a little more arbitrary, but it's easier if you just want to get a rough color in there. So I want to have this garish pink. Put that in there, and we'll have a pink material. And this is a very basic pink material. It's quite sort of bland for the time being because we haven't taken advantage of all these other things in here. And for these, they only operate between 0 and 1. And so we want a constant 1 vector, or just a constant. So you'll see it just has a 1 or a 0 on here. And we just want to drag this onto metallic, for instance. And metallic sort of handles the shininess of an object, or more the reflectivity. And so at 0, once we get a preview showing up, you'll see it's not metallic at all. But if we change it to 1 and hit enter, this will make it as metallic as it can become. And once that's come in, you'll see, okay, it looks a bit strange for the moment, but this means that it's actually quite shiny. Because we're not using specular yet, which is sort of the little reflections you see on things, it makes it a bit more clear. And also the roughness, which is also still at 1. So let's drag in another 2 constants, and let's connect those up with these little wires. And hopefully this isn't too strange to you, but pretty much we're just connecting things with wires from left to right because that's the sort of standard for this bit, for Unreal. There we go. Nice and shiny. So at the moment, this has 0 roughness. So it's as shiny as it possibly can be, which looks very strange because you don't want your whole level to look like Chrome. Well, actually, why not? Have your whole level look like Chrome. But if you want control over it, you want to be using something in between 0 and 1. So let's set it to half rough, if that's sort of a way of understanding it, half the amount of roughness the engine can provide. And at half roughness, you'll see that it kind of gets a bit of reflectivity, not that much, but you can kind of see it in there. If we set it to 0.2, it should be a bit easier to understand. But basically, by editing these numbers, you can get certain different qualities. So this is kind of a slightly polished bit of metal, but it's not quite like mirror finished. And if I change the metallic sort of qualities, maybe move that down a bit, you'll get different qualities. And that's the very basics of how to make a material that's just a color and some qualities. You can also add things like emissions, so it'll look like it glows on screen. So you can see here it's a little less reflective. It's more like plastic now because it's less metallic. The last thing that you sort of want to understand is that there's also types of materials. We'll cover that a bit more in the next video, but just understand when you click on the material box, it's not just the thing that you plug the things into. It does have qualities in itself. And each of these are to do with sort of more advanced materials than the basic ones. So just for applying a color with a bit of shininess and things like that, you'd want to be using the base material opaque blending, because of course it's an opaque object for the most part. But we'll cover how to make glass and other things in the next couple of videos. The last thing you want to do before we finish is just to save this object. And you also want to hit apply, because that'll force it to update all the objects. Well, you can press apply and save. They sort of saving covers both. And if we switch back to our screen, we can make the most garish of garage doors. Yes, so we didn't join this properly together, so it's only applied it to that one bar. But if we, for instance, just make sure we drag it on properly, there we go. Now we have that garish sort of pink color with a bit of reflectivity. It doesn't look the best because we didn't put a lot of effort in, but that's for you guys to do. So in the next video, we'll cover how to go a bit more in depth. So see you next video.
This project was supported by a UTS Widening Participation Strategy, First Year Experience Grant, funded through the Australian Government Higher Education Participation and Partnership Program. The videos were produced by Matthew Austin and Adrian Taylor.